Thank you guys for braving the late night. I know it's starting to get ready for sleepy time, but I appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you. So this talk is going to be preserving video game music before it's too late. Real quick, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Dean Tersini. I created the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation, which it's basically like an online museum for video game music. This is what the main site looks like. You'll see that, I don't know if you can tell for sure, but it uses the same software as Wikipedia. So people can create accounts, they can go online and add to the information that we have up there. And you'll see that we have sections for games, for composers, for the hardware that's used in video game music. Our ultimate goal is to have a page for every game and every single song for every single game. It's a lofty goal, but I think it's one that's important to have. So I want to start with something that's probably not controversial at MAGFest, and that's I believe that video games are art. And I don't mean that the way that some people might mean that. When I say video games are art, obviously video games are made by artists. So these are painters and graphic designers and musicians and writers, and everything that they create as artists is going to be art, of course. But video games are unique as a form of art because they're interactive and challenging. Even if they didn't have the painting and the graphic design, they would still be art in and of themselves. So show of hands here. I know there's 12 of you. So how many people here agree with me that video games are art? Everybody. Okay. I had a joke in the works about if you didn't raise your hand, you should go to a furry convention because you're in the wrong spot. But I mean, oh, I know. I don't mean to discourage furries. You guys are a clean and industrious people. Yifan, my brother, Yifan. So there's two things that are true for all art. The first thing that's true is that art needs to be experienced. This is the whole point of art. You know, you're creating something where you're putting your emotions and your soul into that piece of work. And if you don't actually share it with other people, if nobody gets to experience it, then the world is missing out on something important. The second thing that's true for all art, and this is directly related to the first, is that art needs to be preserved. Imagine if Beethoven creates this glorious symphony, and he plays it for a few people, and they get to hear it, and that's wonderful, but then he dies, and his symphony dies with him. That would be awful. The rest of the world would miss out on something very important. And by preserving art, we allow the maximum amount of people to be able to experience the art. So let's bring this into our culture. Let's talk about video games. I want you to imagine your favorite video game. Now, I don't know what game that would be. You know, maybe it's a Zelda game, or maybe it's a Mario game, or a Final Fantasy game. If you come from a PC background like me, maybe it's an Ultima game. Maybe it's the best game that was ever made, Daikatana. I got a little chuckle there. All right, one person's paying attention. All right. All right, the last one's just a joke that I threw in there. Let's just try and forget Daikatana. Try to forget. But seriously though, picture in your head your favorite video game, the one that means the most to you, the one that, you know, you pretended to be sick so you could stay home from school and play the game all day long, the one that you spent an entire summer vacation playing, the one that, when you think about it, even now, you just get chills down your spine because the game is just that good. Now, you probably are thinking ahead. You're thinking, I know what he wants me to do. He wants me to imagine that the game was never made and that I never played it, and wouldn't that be tragic? And yes, that would be tragic, but what I want you to do is, it's much, much worse than that. I want you to imagine that the game was made, you played it and fell in love with it, and then some time goes by, you feel like, it's been too long that I've played that game. I want to go back and play it again. And then you try to put it in and it's broken. So ebay.com, you type in your game, and not only is nobody selling a copy, but But there are hundreds of people out there trying to buy it, saying, I will give you $100, $500, $1,000. Anyone who has a copy of this game, please, I need to play it again. But nobody has it. And then it dawns on you, I can never play this game again, ever. And even worse than that, I can't share it with my friends. I can't, when I have children one day, I can't show it to them and let them play it. The game is gone. Now, when I do this thought experiment in my head, and I really try to picture what it would be like to lose my favorite game, I actually tear up, not gonna lie. And then I have to remind myself, Dean, this is just pretend. It's all make-believe. You know, the game is still there. You can go back and play it at any time you want. But what if you really couldn't? Let me give you an example here. Well, how about that? The Oregon Trail. I thought this was fitting. Now, this is a movie poster, but the Oregon Trail is like the best known educational software title ever made. A lot of people think that it got started on the Apple II, but it actually got started in 1971 on a university mini computer, which that's older than I am. Looking around, that's older than most of us here. But now this film, though, isn't about the video game. It's about the actual Oregon Trail. It came out in 1936. And even though it stars John Wayne, one of the most prolific actors in the Western genre, I'm willing to bet that nobody here owns a copy of this film. I will bet $1,000 of my own money that nobody has a copy of this film. I made that graphic myself. That's Pitfall Harry from the game Pitfall. He's happy about it. But $1,000, like, that's chump change these days. I'm gonna raise the stakes. I will bet you the deed to my house, my wedding ring, and my firstborn child. That's her, Gabriella. Thank you. But, you know, I'll even throw in her twin sister. You can get Ileana as well. Of course, yeah, if you win, joke's on you. They just turned 2. They're absolute nightmares right now. Sucker. Okay, why is it that I feel so confident that I can make such a ridiculous bet? Because I know nobody here has a copy of that film. Nobody at MAGFest has a copy. Nobody anywhere has a copy of that film. It's a lost film. We know the film was made because we have the movie posters and we have these. These are stills, production stills, photographs that were taken during the filming process that would be used as advertisements later on. So we know that the film exists. We just, well, existed perhaps. We don't have a copy of it anywhere. And Western film buffs have traveled all over the world looking at old film studios, old libraries and archives, trying to find a copy of this film. But they never have. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to find it, and they can't. And this is not unusual. I could have made, I just picked the Oregon Trail because, you know, it fits with our culture. But I could have picked any number of films. The Library of Congress estimates that 75% of all films of the silent era have been lost. The Martin Scorsese Film Institute puts that number even higher. They estimate that 90% of all films prior to 1929 have been lost. 90% of the pioneer era of the film artistic medium. Imagine with our culture, 90% of our pioneers. Here's some of our pioneers. You know, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Zork, Breakout, Rogue, Donkey Kong, Mystery House, Asteroids, Wizardry, Defender. Imagine losing 90% of those. There's only 10 games there, so you only get to keep 1. And if you lose one of these games, you don't just lose the game, you lose everything that is derivative of that game as well. If you lose Donkey Kong, it's one of the very first platformers. That means no Super Mario Brothers, no Sonic the Hedgehog. If you lose Defender, it's one of the first scrolling shooters. There are thousands of scrolling shooters out there. And throughout human history, throughout how we've been creating art, it has been extremely commonplace to lose art. Because throughout our history, we've been living in the analog era. And when you create art in an analog medium, you cannot create a perfect duplicate. Now, take a painting as an analog medium, for example. You can hire somebody to recreate the Mona Lisa. But anyone who truly loves and understands the Mona Lisa will look at that copy and they'll, this is a fake. This is garbage. This isn't the original. And think about music as well. You can hire a band to play, you take your favorite song, hire somebody to record the same instruments and sing the same lyrics, but the moment you hear it, this is a cover. I'm not impressed. Give me the original. But all of that changed just a few decades ago when we entered the digital era. Suddenly, if you create a piece of art in a digital medium, take Adobe Photoshop, for example, you can create a perfect copy, not an analog, not a facsimile, but a legitimate 100% identical copy. And with the cheap price of storage capacity now, you can make millions and millions of copies of it essentially for free. And thanks to the power of the internet and broadband communication, you can send those copies all over the world essentially for free, until the FBI catches you. Now, earlier in this talk, I mentioned that video games are a special form of art because they're interactive and challenging, but they're special in another way too, and that is, by their very nature, video games are entirely digital. And that means something really special. That means that with video games, as an artistic medium, this is the first time in forever, that's a Frozen reference, by the way. For the first time in forever, we have the ability to preserve an entire artistic medium from the very first piece that was ever created forever into perpetuity. We can actually preserve every single video game that has ever existed. Imagine that with painting. It's not possible. Millions of paintings have already been lost. Sculptures, they've been defaced, they've broken down, they've worn away. You cannot do this with any of the analog mediums. This is going to be the first time that we could ever do that. But what I'm going to show you is simply having the ability to preserve an art form isn't enough. Let me give you an example of what I mean. This is the band Green Day. Green Day, like video games, got their, yeah, you guys know. They got their start after the digital era. And in 2002, they set about creating a brand new album. It was going to be recorded all digital. They got a list of songs. They had started recording some of their instrumental tracks. They started recording some of their vocal tracks. They even had a title picked out. It was going to be called Cigarettes and Valentines. And after working on it for months, they came into their studio one day, and to their horror, they realized that their studio was broken into, and all of their equipment had been stolen out of it. Now, I'm sure when they first saw that, they were just angry, and they wanted to find that person and grab their little head and just pop it right up. But then they started to realize, oh my God, our album, it's gone. All of that work, all of that effort, the love, the soul that we put into that music, it's gone. Now, anyone here who's ever lost something important to them, you know the feeling. There's an emptiness in the pit of your stomach, and no matter what you do, you can't make it go away. You cannot fill that void. A part of you is gone. It's actually not that unlike losing a loved one, because this is something that you put a lot of love into, and you nurtured it, and now it's gone. By the way, that album has never surfaced. Most likely, the thieves were intelligent enough to delete all of the hard drives of the equipment that they sold, and then they probably sold it to a pawn shop, and maybe they got a few $1,000s out of it. A few $1,000s for an album that would have been heard and loved by millions of people They got a few $1,000s. That makes me sick. It's so wasteful. Well, I hope that I've convinced you that it's important to preserve art, and that art is very fragile and it can be lost, especially before it's finished, when the artist is still working on it. Most artists do not like having people see an unfinished product, so they keep it hidden, they keep it away, and it's very vulnerable at that time. Well, if I have convinced you that video games need to be preserved, that raises the very simple question: who is going to be preserving them? Now, you may think, well, the video game manufacturers are going to preserve their video games because this is their product. I see some of you shaking your heads already. You know where I'm going with this, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, I will continue. Surely they will, if they don't preserve their games, they can't sell them, they can't make money, and they'll go out of business, right? Well, let me give you an example. It's a small indie developer. You've probably never even heard of them. They're called Sega. Oh, someone's heard of it. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. All right, well, I'll drop the charade. Sega is a multi-billion-dollar organization. They've created thousands and thousands of games. They're huge all over the world. But like many old video game companies that have been around for a long time, they got their start in the arcade. And this is one of their very first games. This is called Goal Kick. It came out in 1974. It's not their first, but one of them. And take a look at this arcade cabinet. It's kind of weird looking, right? It doesn't look like what we think of today with arcade cabinets. It's got these little legs coming down. There's no joystick. There's not even any buttons. There's just these little dials. Well, this illustrates a really interesting fact about the early arcade games, and that is the first generation of games had to be designed completely from the ground up. Every component of them, the boards, the wiring, the circuitry, all of it, for every single game. They weren't reusing components at the time. And Sega, by the way, that's a huge time sink for the developers. They can't just simply focus on the game. They have to completely rebuild all the hardware every single time. So no doubt, taking a page from the home consoles, Sega said, well, what if we just made a single board that you could slot games into it? And they came up with this beautiful thing. This is the System 16 board, and it has everything that you need to play a game. It has a CPU, it has a graphics processor, an audio chip, it has RAM, it has I/O controls, everything, except it doesn't have a game. The game you would slot onto as a ROM board, very similar to the way that a home console works. And you can see it came out, the first game anyway, came out in 1985. This allowed the Sega game developers to not have to worry about all the hardware. They could just simply design a game to meet the specifications of this board. And what games they made, look at this. Altered Beast, Shinobi, Golden Axe. These games were hugely popular in the 80s. If you were in an arcade in the 80s, chances are they'd have one, if not all three of these titles. But it didn't stop with just these gems. Look at this. This is the complete collection of Sega System 16 games. There's about 35 titles there, all made by one company within just a few years' time. That's how successful the System 16 board was. But of course, you know, us gamers, we're rabid. We want new and better and faster. So these games, while they were really great when they first came out, they slowly drifted to the back of the arcade, and then over time, they just disappeared altogether. Until the virtual consoles came out. And Sega, who had a massive back catalog of games, was really able to capitalize on the virtual consoles because they could re-release their Master System games and their Genesis games and their 32X games and even a lot of their old arcade games. Except, a reporter at Kotaku noticed something odd. Where are all the System 16 games? Why aren't they releasing them? So they asked Sega, and a representative for Sega said, Well, Sega, when we release a game for the Virtual Console, we like to go back to the source code and sort of upgrade it to work with modern consoles. We'll give it widescreen support, we'll upsample the audio, that kind of stuff. And we looked everywhere for the source code of our System 16 games, and we can't find it anywhere. We just seem to have lost it. It's like, how did you lose it? It's your source code. What did you do? And the Sega representative explained, well, we've moved offices so many times. And you know how when you go to move, you don't want to move everything that you have in storage. So what you do is you look through it, and if anything looks too old or useless, you just throw it in the trash. Well, probably what we did is we took all of our old computers that had all of the source code for all of our old games and threw it in the trash. It's just like, how could you, why on earth would you, you're so, you dumb mother, Okay, happy place. All right. Now, just for grins, I went and I looked up what a hard drive in 1985 would cost. And this I got out of PC Magazine from January 1985. Look at this. 10 megabytes. That's mega with an M. And it only cost you $700. In today's money, by the way, that's $1,600 roughly for 10 megabytes. Woo! To put that into perspective, today you can buy a 1 terabyte flash drive the size of your pinky finger for under $300. So Sega, in their infinite wisdom, thought to themselves, we've got all of these old computers with potentially important software on them. We could put them all, like literally every single computer that we've ever had through the 70s and 80s and most of the 90s, every single hard drive could be put on that one flash drive. We could wear it around as a lanyard, but they thought, no, let's throw all of our stuff in the trash instead. Well, great job, Sega. You shot yourselves in the foot again. All right, well, I don't want to be too hard on Sega because the reality is, in the 1980s, everybody who did software lost their source code. It was just a problem with source code at the time. There was no GitHub, there was no SourceForge, and you couldn't back stuff up to the cloud because there was no cloud yet. So like everybody lost their source code. Nintendo did, Capcom did, some of the PC companies like Sierra Online, Origin Systems, even major corporations like IBM, they all lost source code in the 80s. Now, not all of them purposely threw it in the trash, but I can even understand that. Because think about it from Sega's perspective. Now, the game designers, they realize that they are creating art. They understand that. But the game companies, the people that actually own the copyrights, they're just that. They're companies. A company needs to make money, first and foremost. Now, they can do good things too, but if they don't make money, they go out of business. That's just what's going to happen. So I can understand, some corporate person looking at all these old computers and saying, we're never going to be able to sell an arcade cabinet computer program from 10 years back. Something that'll cost like $3,000 or $4,000 for one game that takes about as much space as a refrigerator to the average person. We can't do that. Throw it away. Let's bring out our new games. Let's sell our new games. I get that. That makes sense. But it's that lack of foresight. Nobody in the 80s was thinking, hey, 20 years from now, we're going to take all of this top-of-the-line hardware and we're going to emulate it in software on a machine that you can just buy off the shelf at Best Buy. Nobody was thinking that. Well, nobody except the gamers. We were thinking of that. We were seeing our favorite arcade games falling apart, breaking down, and not having the hardware to be able to fix them. So a lot of technical gamers said, it won't stand. We got to do something about this. So they started emulating all of these old games. It's an extremely painstaking process. It requires a lot of knowledge that you could actually sell to major corporations, but instead, as a labor of love, they They emulated a lot of arcade cabinets, then video game consoles, and even old 8-bit and 16-bit computers with projects like MESS and 1,000 other ones that I can't name off right now. And inadvertently in doing this, they released all their source code as open source. Anybody could download it. Now the ROMs themselves was proprietary, that's illegal, but the emulators were all free. In doing that, they created both the market and the product for virtual consoles. Because Nintendo wasn't thinking, you know what we should do? We should blow a few $1 million to get a bunch of programmers in here to emulate old, obsolete hardware. We don't even know if anybody wants to do this. And then we need to buy thousands of game cartridges, unscrew the backs of them, pull out all the ROM cartridges, put them on an EEPROM reader, get all the data dumped out, and then put it online. It's a giant website. It'll cost millions of dollars. And we don't even know if anybody wants that. They weren't thinking that. They already knew there was a huge market because emulation had become so popular. So, and by the way, I'm not encouraging piracy. I just want to point out that the real heroes here are not Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo. It's the gamers. These are the people that actually made virtual consoles possible. Well, let me swing back to the question that I asked, it seems like 20 minutes ago now. Can we trust the game developers to preserve their art? No, absolutely not. If it were up to them, we would have lost thousands of games. They don't care. If it can't make money, they don't care about it. So, all right, well, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer because there is some good news. The good news is, thank you. The good news is that because of passionate gamers who have ripped ROMs and disk images and made CD ISOs and all of these things and the emulators to play them on, we have already preserved the vast majority of video games that have ever been made. If you were to go to a torrent site and download every single ROM torrent that you could find, you would have literally over 100,000 games at your disposal. So that's the good news. The vast majority of the games are already safe. They're distributed all over the world on thousands and thousands of computers. And actually, there's better news. Because of projects like mine, the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation, as well as countless others, a lot of the music has already been extracted from the games in a simple playable format. So now instead, if you want to hear, say, the ending theme to Final Fantasy VI, Nobuo Uematsu's 20-minute long ending theme, you don't have to spend hours playing Final Fantasy VI. You can just simply play the song and you'll hear it. That's the good news. The bad news, well, let me show you. This is Brad Fuller. He worked at Atari Corporation, did a whole bunch of their arcade soundtracks. You probably know his music best from Tetris and Marble Madness, two really classic games. This is Richard Joseph. He did a whole bunch of games, worked at a whole bunch of companies. Probably his best known work is The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. This is Russell Lieblich. This guy, he's been around forever. His first game, first soundtrack was in 1982 on the Intellivision. But he's done tons of games since then. You probably know his work best from Maxis. He did a lot of the soundtracks for the Sim games. This is Azusa Hara. She worked at Data East. I couldn't find a photograph of her, I'm sorry. But this little cartoon character of her is, you'll see it if you beat the arcade version of Bad Dudes. You guys remember Bad Dudes, right? You're a bad enough dude to rescue the president? No, I don't care. The ninjas can keep him. Moving on. This is Ben Daglish. This guy, he's put out like over 100 soundtracks, seriously. And most Americans don't even know who he is because he is European. And most of the games that he composed music for were released primarily in Europe. Yeah, like over 100 soundtracks. It's insane. He did like home computers, like the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, and then a bunch of the American PCs that made it to Europe, like the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Atari 8-bit series, the ST, obviously the IBM PC, and did a bunch of video game consoles as well. Well, Does anyone know why I bring up these 5 composers in particular? Anyone know what they have in common? Sort of. They're all dead. I started the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation because I love video game music. I absolutely adore it. I listen to it all the time. And think about your favorite bands. You probably know an awful lot about them. You probably know all their albums. You could probably even tell me the full names of all of the band members and even like the story, the inspiration behind a lot of their songs. Well, those are the kind of questions I want to ask them. I want to ask, like, did you learn music like self-taught? Did your parents teach you? Did you go to university for it? Who are your favorite bands? What of your compositions are your favorite songs? How did you take a song that was in your head and push it through this cheap 8-bit synthesizer and create something truly glorious? How did that happen? But I can't ask any of them now because they're gone. So who is going to preserve their voices? Now, you might think, well, what about the government? Okay, bear with me here. It sounds a little silly, but you know, the government funds a lot of culture, a lot of art. They give money to symphonies, to museums, to libraries, to theaters. Surely we can convince a senator maybe to create, I don't know, like an endowment for video game music? Okay, it sounds even stupider when I put it that way. The reality is, trying to convince a 95-year-old senator that he should spend taxpayer money preserving video games when he grew up thinking the height of technology was like the telegraph, and he views video games as these toys that his grandchildren play, that's a hard sell. Now there's going to come a time in, I don't know, maybe about 40 or 50 years when everybody who is in the government will have grown up with video games being just as ubiquitous as movies and music, records. Like, that's going to be totally mainstream for everyone in the government in about 40 or 50 years. But we can't wait 40 or 50 years. If we wait that long, the vast majority of the people who composed music in these early video games, the first 3 generations or so, they'll all be dead. We won't be able to record their stories. We won't get anything from them. They'll be dead. So, who is going to preserve video game music? Well, I hope you figured it out already. You are. You and you and you especially. That's right. Everyone in this room, everyone at MAGFest, we have to be the ones to do it because nobody else will. Because nobody else cares. Now they will care. You know, 30 or 40 years from now, there are going to be people that are going to think back to their childhood with nostalgia in their eyes, and they're going to be like, you remember that game that we played? That title music? Oh, it was so haunting. Who composed that? What were they thinking? How did they actually make that music for that old video game? They won't have those answers. They'll look for them, but they won't find them. Not without your help. So I want everyone here, take out your phones. I know you're not supposed to do this, but take out your phones, your tablets, your laptops, any device that you have that can get you on the internet. Go to VGMPF.com. That's Video Game Music Preservation Foundation.com. Right on the main page, there's a link. Create an account. Click that link. It'll take you to an account creation. Just put in a username and password. That's all you need. You don't have to give your real name or an email address. That's all it takes. Once you get that account created, you can now edit the page as well. You can add your knowledge of video game music to the internet so that everybody else can learn from your wisdom. Now you may think to yourself, I'm just a gamer, you know, I don't have the expertise that you'll need in order to do this, but believe me, you do. Everyone here has the expertise that we need to make this site grow. Do you have tech skills? Well, then we need your help, because we need people to extract audio from games, to write players for these bizarre audio formats that have been used over the years, to describe the audio hardware that has been used in video game consoles and computers. Do you speak a foreign language? Well, then we need your help. We need people to contact all of these composers, many of whom do not speak English at all. Now, obviously, Japanese is going to be the most useful language, but video games have become a global market now. If you can speak a language other than English, I guarantee you there is a composer out there who only speaks that language. If it could be one of the European languages, of course, there are many, many composers out there that speak the various European languages, but even the more bizarre ones like Arabic, Korean, Russian, any of the Chinese dialects, all of them, there are composers out there now. Do you have musical skills? You can, like I said earlier, the goal of the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation is to have a web page for every single song from every single game. And it would be great if we could have those songs described using proper music terminology, because while I might write, well, this song plays fast, you will write, the tempo of this song is vivissimo. And yes, I had to look that up because I don't know anything about music. Are you an internet stalker? You know, the ones laughing are. We need your help to track down these composers. Many of the early composers were not credited at all in their games. Or if they were credited using an alias that makes it impossible to find them now. Well, not impossible. A lot of these people, they have retired, they've moved on to other fields of expertise, but if they're still alive, they probably have social media. They probably have a Facebook page, many of them do. If they are still working, they probably have a LinkedIn page, which will include their resume, which will show you the companies that they have worked for, so you can help track them down that way. Do you have writing skills? We need your help. We need people to improve the quality of the articles, to fix grammar, to spot... Oh, there's a typo there. Oh well. A lot of the editors speak English as a second language. They're people from other countries, and while they do fantastic work for the site, their English needs a little bit of improving. And if you are really good at English, you can not only help them learn English better, but also improve the quality of the site overall. Now, here's something that I know everybody here can help with. Do you know how to play video games? A couple of you? All right, cool. We need you to beat the games, take screenshots, especially at the ending credits where it lists out the audio personnel. We keep that on the website for every game that we can. And because we have all of these individual song pages, it helps us a lot to have a screenshot of where in the game those songs are played, so that the people, when they view the website, they'll see, oh yeah, I remember that in that game. That's one of my favorite sections. And they'll know, they'll be able to tie the audio to the visual component of the game. So let me just wrap up here. This is our only chance to do this, to preserve an entire artistic medium from its very beginning forever. It's never been possible before. This is the first time to do it, and this is the perfect time to do it, and MAGFest is the perfect place to do it. There are literally video game composers walking around the halls of this hotel. Find them, go up to them, ask them questions. They'll love to talk about their art. Take what they tell you and add it to the wiki, add it to our webpage, so that everybody in the world can have this knowledge. We must preserve video game music, and we have to do it now. We can't wait a year from now, a month from now, or even tomorrow. The people involved are just now starting to die off. We're losing some of them. The Video Game Music Preservation Foundation even maintains a category for audio personnel who have died. And unless there's a zombie apocalypse, that is just going to keep growing. More and more are going to die. We're going to lose these artists, and it's very tragic. We don't want that to happen. I want to end with just, this is something that I was researching for this talk, and I saw it, and it just floored me. This is a flute made of bone. The marrow was hollowed out, and then holes were carved into the top of it. This flute is over 40,000 years old. That's insane. 40,000 years old. People were making instruments back then. And it just makes me think of all these questions. What was the person like that carved this? What was his culture like, or her culture like? What kind of music did they play on this? Was it dubstep or techno? It had to have been one of the two, right? The reality is, we have no idea who created this. We have no idea what their culture is like. We have no idea who they are at all. We know nothing about their art. But this, MAGFest, this is who we are. This is our culture. This is our art. We need to preserve video game music so that 40,000 years from now, people still know who we are. They still know the games that we play and the music that we listen to. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know what time it is. Oh, God, I got a half hour still. 20 minutes. Are there any questions? Feel free. Yes?
There's a podcast called Legacy Music Hour.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, I was going to say, they kind of go into talking about composers and some, facts about the music and the development.
Absolutely. For the recording, he mentioned the Legacy Music Hour. I have actually farmed their podcast because they do interviews with composers as well, and I use that information to add to it. And I'll also cite them and provide a link to their podcast every time I do that as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Absolutely, yeah. Any other questions? Feel free. I mean, we got the room. This is the last panel. Nobody else is going to come here and kick us out. So yeah, whatever. Anyone? No? Yes.
Is there any specific era of game you're looking for, or are you looking for any?
Okay, so the question, is there any specific era that I'm looking for, or just any music at all? Quick answer, any music at all, as long as it's for a video game of some sort. There is one caveat, because we do provide the music from the game on the website. You can go to the website and you can type in a game and you can click play right on there and it will play the music from the game. Now that is copyrighted material for most of the games that we have. So to try and not get shut down by the feds, we request that nobody release a game until it's at least 10 years old. Don't put the music available. But there is a caveat there as well. You can still do it if the game is freeware, if it's a demo, if it's shareware. Any of those are fair game. Public domain as well. Anything like that is fine. But if it's still a copyrighted game, we request that you wait at least 10 years, just so I don't want to be dragged out of my home in handcuffs and my little girls, Daddy, where's he going? Not again. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you make music?
Do I make music? I would love to be able to be that talented. No. My profession is computer programming. I write software. And I maintain this website. But yeah, I adore music. I absolutely love it. And through this project, I've learned a lot more about music, and I've been able to appreciate it a lot more. But unfortunately, no, I don't play any instruments or anything. No. Yeah, save here. I can play a triangle off key. I don't know how it's possible, but I can. Yeah.
Two chords on the ukulele.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
How long has this website been around?
Oh, yeah, good question. How long has the website been around? I actually started it initially. What I would do is I would record video game music from games as I was playing them, way back in the day, because I didn't know of any other opportunity to do it. And then I would burn it onto a CD because I didn't have an MP3 player yet. And my friends were like, dude, that's so cool, you know, how did you do that? And, you know, I talked them through the process, and they weren't as techie as I was. Like, I'm hooking up component cables to my speakers to an input and everything. So what I would do is, after I started being able to do it digitally, where I'm playing like NSF files and SID files and SPC files and all of these, I would record them to like MP3 format. And then I would burn them on a CD and give them to them. But then, like, a bunch of other friends wanted, and, you know, CDs were still expensive at the time, so I started putting them up on my website, and that anybody who wanted to could then download them. And after I started doing this, I really got into it. And like, you start looking at, like, you know, these aliases of these weird words. They're like kind of Japanese, kind of English. And so, like, I would go and try and find other sites online that could help me figure out who these people were. And that's what really got me into the site. That's when I created the site officially. And your original question of when did I first go live online with it, I want to say like 2008, around there, 2009 maybe. But yeah, I've been recording video game music since, like, I don't know, the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I remember recording Mega Man music to a cassette player.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which Mega Man? All. Yeah.
Mostly to two.
Oh yeah, yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
I'm curious if you have any plans of, well, I know you said like a 10-year period.
Yeah.
But there are also, like, now there are 10 games where you won't get a cartridge, it's only online, like
Yes.
Suppose or something like that.
Yeah.
At that point, you can't wait until it's dead or
Right, yes.
then they'll just shut the server off and you can gather it later.
Absolutely, yeah. So the question, I'll attempt to form it as a question. For completely online only games, how do you can't really wait the 10 years because many of them just go offline before 10 years. So how do you get the music? Usually what we do is, I know I do this personally, and that is, no matter how old the game is, oftentimes the moment I get a game, the first thing I'll do is I'll go through the files and I'll try and find out where the music is, because I'm curious, like, what format did they use? That's one thing that the data or the foundation has as well. There's a page for every single audio format that has been used throughout video games. We're now over 100 of them, and some of them are used in only like one game. That's it. So what I'll do is I'll try and extract all of the audio that I can, and then I will keep it myself on my computer. And then when the game becomes 10 years old, then I will put it on my website. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? No? Yes?
I feel like I'm talking to
Oh, no, dude, hey, let's do it. There's 8 people here. Come on.
So this is less of a question. It could be a question.
Yeah.
But this is all very cool stuff.
Thank you.
I'm not like super aware of like how to rip music.
Sure.
I found a website recently where you can download like Super Nintendo files, and then
Yeah.
get it back with like this proprietary software where you can like, listen to like each channel individually.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
But like I have no concept of like how to rip that myself.
Okay.
Does this website have that kind of information, or how does that?
Yeah, so the question is, does the website contain the necessary information to rip music and audio from games? And for many of them, yes, it does. What we'll do is whoever's techie enough to go and look at the game and figure out how to extract the music, they will describe in detail the process, or if they used a program to do it, they will say, I used this program specifically, and then you can download that program and do it yourself. The goal is that if for some reason, you know, Capcom decides, no, you're not putting our music up there, and they shut us down, we can still keep the part that is legal, and that is the instructions for how anyone who actually owns a physical copy of the game, they can remove it themselves, or they can extract it themselves. And we also show you how to do things like to take SPC files, Super Nintendo music, and convert that to MP3 or WAV or FLAC or any other audio format that you want. There's guides on how to do that. And Also, you can create an account, and if you find a different way that you prefer to do, you can create your own guide, and that anyone else who now views it, they can see your technique of doing it, and then they can follow your steps. So, and everyone here as well, by the way. Did somebody over here have their hand up? Yes.
Yeah, is there a preference of original soundtrack versus embedded music files?
The question, is there a preference between original soundtracks versus embedded files?
Yeah, so
Oh,
that are included with the game versus files that were provided as some separate disk.
Gotcha. Okay, so yeah, let me make this clear, actually. The Video Game Music Preservation Foundation is about the preservation of video game music, not the soundtracks. Because with a soundtrack, it's all right there for you. You know, this is the music that's on the soundtrack. That's what you get. There's no effort that's needed to extract it from a game. Like, what's a good example? Mega Man 2. On the official soundtrack for Mega Man 2, it plays the title music and then it ties it in with the, the intro music ties into the title music in one single track on the soundtrack. In the game, they're actually two separate tracks. And if you play the opening introduction music, it actually doesn't end and then merge into the title music in the same way that you hear it in the game and on the soundtrack. It's kind of like there's a little bit of audio that's never used in the game, and that's something that can be recorded for the Video Game Music Preservation Foundation. We find a lot of oddities like that, like soundtracks or songs that are included in the game's files but never played anywhere in the game. And we will render those. We will actually convert those to MP3 or audio, and so that you can listen to those as well. But yeah, so yeah, we don't want to copy soundtrack files just because that's just straight up piracy. You know, that's the exact same thing that you would get from there. It's not all these weird steps that or the hurdles that you would have to jump over to extract it from the game. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Does that also so has there ever been consideration about like dynamic music where it's...
Oh yeah.
That kind of gets a little more...
Yes, yeah, the question is, how do you handle dynamic music? A lot of modern games now, they don't just play a loop of a song in the background. They're very dynamic. One of my favorite games, Borderlands, has very dynamic music. It's constantly changing, and that's hard to do. Usually what we'll do is we'll make all of the files available, and then it's kind of up to the user to download them and figure out how they want them to play, because there are actually programs out there. System Shock is a very early game that uses dynamic music like that, and somebody wrote a program that basically generates the audio in a similar way that the game plays. So it will not randomly pick the tracks, but it will follow a mood and a flow just like the game. And I think there's a link to that program. I'm not positive though. But that's a way that we could handle it, other than just simply, here's all the files, good luck. Yeah, but yeah, great question. Yeah. Yes?
Do you also include the sound effects, the iconic Zelda opening of the chest?
Yes. The question is, do you include the sound effects as well? For the games that we're able to, yes, we do. Usually what we do with sound effects, the site is primarily focused on the music, so that is what we have available to listen to, but there is also, for every single game we try to do this, there is a zip file that you can download which contains the original music format and all of the original sound effects that we were able to extract. So a lot of old DOS and Windows games would use WAV files, and we will include those if we were able to extract them, but we won't put them as an individual page, just because we would have 10,000 jump sound effect pages, and that's a bit much. But yeah, great question. Yeah. Anyone else? No? All right. For those of you who I didn't hand a card out to, please come up, grab a card. It has the URL, that one right there, of the site. So if you weren't able to create an account just now, you can take it home with you. You can create an account then. You don't even have to create an account. Just visit the page. Go through some of the games. We have a wealth of information. There are I think over 1,000 composers on there now. Many games. The music is freely available. You can download it. You can put it right onto your phone or your MP3 player or whatever you want, and you can just listen to it. You don't even have to do that if you want. You can listen to it directly from the page. And there's a lot of technical information up there as well, which I know technical information sounds scary, but it's very interesting because it shows you a complete history of video games and how music was created for them, how different composers did it. Like Nintendo, they had their composers write assembly code to make the music. It's extremely hard to do. Even like professional programmers have a hard time doing this, but Nintendo required them to do that. Whereas other companies, like David Wise, who is here, who worked at Rare, his was, I'm sorry, no, he did assembly as well. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but what they would do is they would write a converter program where they would compose the song in MIDI, just standard straight up MIDI on a keyboard, and then they would convert it into the music necessary to play on a Nintendo or a Super Nintendo game. And that, it didn't yield the same quality of results, which is why a lot of the Japanese games have a much better sound, a much more crisp sound. But it did yield some very interesting results in the conversion process. There's tons of information up on there, and hopefully you can add your information to it as well. Thank you.